Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alex Vines. I'm the Director of the Africa Programme here at Chatham House, and I'm chairing the meeting today, so I'm very pleased to welcome the very large audience we have online, but also those of you who are in the hall. Today's meeting is on the Democratic Republic of Congo's foreign policy priorities, and I am delighted that we have Her Excellency Therese Wagner, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the DRC, who will be talking about the DRC's regional diplomacy and international agency, including the country's positioning in global critical mineral supply chains. DRC is a country that throughout its history, Chatham House has really focused upon. So there were seminal books written about the Congo crisis many years ago, which are still available in our library. I was telling the Honourable Minister that a gentleman called Mobutu Sese Seko spoke here about how there was going to be change in Congo. A coup happened soon afterwards. That speech is again in our archives. And a couple of years ago, President Tshisekedi spoke here, amongst others. So it is a real privilege for us to be having the Foreign Minister speaking on a country that is so central, so important, is in the heart of Africa. And at times, I feel that everybody else wants to pull it apart. They want a part of Congo, and we don't hear enough from the Congolese themselves about what they want for their country. We hear more about the Rwandans, the Ugandans, the Angolans, and so the story goes on. This is on the record, so I don't need to tell you about the Chatham House rule. So you can report absolutely everything that is said and discussed in this room. So there are journalists in the room, and there are people that are taking photographs. If you want to tweet, please do, or X as it is called now. I will also be please do use the hashtag #CHAfrica if you can. In terms of health and safety, we are not expecting any emergency or a fire alarm drill. So if you suddenly do hear an alarm, then something serious is happening, and I will tell you how to get out. There's doors there, but there's also another door here. I think that's it from me. Minister, thank you so much for coming to Chatham House. I'm going to invite you to take the podium, and let's have a robust discussion on the Democratic Republic of Congo. This is such an important opportunity for all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vines, for this very generous introduction. And of course, I want to thank Chatham House for having me here, and thank you for reminding me of the illustrious sequence of Congolese leaders who had already the opportunity to speak here at Chatham House. I think I have the added responsibility and burden probably of being one of the first women in such a position, so I'm very cognizant of that. I'd like to thank also all of the participants in person and of course online. I think this underscores the importance of our discussions here, but also underscores the importance of the interest that the Democratic Republic of the Congo continues to trigger, both in the UK and certainly beyond, since we have an audience connecting live via the internet. I want first of all to emphasize the fact that my visit to the UK and also participating here in this discussion that we're going to have in a few moments inscribes itself in an effort to strengthen the ties between the two countries, strengthen the ties between the UK and the DRC that are long-reaching, far-reaching, but have a lot of potential that I think we can still tap into and harness further for the benefits of both countries and of course of both people. So as the topic already indicates, I want to talk today about the foreign policy objectives of the DRC, starting first of all with some key priorities that set the stage for us. First of all, it's about repositioning the DRC on the global stage. President Tshisekedi has been very upfront about this. He's our #1 diplomat and has been doing that in his first mandate, making sure that the DRC is more present, is more audible, is more visible on the international stage, beyond also some of our traditional areas of comfort. And this is something that I also take upon myself as one of my key responsibilities, making sure that we engage with more partners, with more stakeholders, and that we broaden our perspective, but also that we start taking up more space, not just on the map, but also in conversations that are so important. And so that means also expanding the scope of our diplomacy, going beyond the diplomacy that has been naturally dominated by the peace and security agenda, because our country, unfortunately, has been the center of one of the world's most horrendous humanitarian crises. This continues to be a priority for us, but it doesn't mean that this is all we have to offer as a DRC, also diplomatically speaking. So it means that in our diplomacy, we want to broaden the scope. We want to look at areas that go beyond peace and security conversations and that enable us to engage in conversations on economic diplomacy, environmental diplomacy, and of course, cultural diplomacy, where we have so much to offer, where we have been present, but have maybe not been showcasing our presence as much as we could. And this goes hand in hand, of course, with strengthening bilateral cooperation, but also multilateral cooperation. And so in this regard, as I said in the beginning, being here in the UK, it's one of my first visits in Europe, is a strong signal that we want to send to the United Kingdom. We want to strengthen our ties. We want to have stronger relationships with the UK, but also looking at multilateral cooperation. The DRC is being more assertive, is being more present. Starting, first of all, with the African Union Peace and Security Council. In its 20-year existence, this is the first time that the DRC is a member of the Council. And in a few days, we will be the president or chairing the Council for a 1-month period, which is something that we are looking forward to, because this gives us the opportunity, but also the responsibility of shaping our African peace and security architecture. Two other milestones that I want to highlight when it comes to multilateralism is our recent election to the United Nations Human Rights Council for a 2-year period, but also our candidacy for a non-permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council for 26-27, which has been endorsed by the AU. So I think these are some of the key tenets, but when we look at specific issues that we want to focus on when we're talking about our foreign policy, as I said in the beginning, peace and security, national sovereignty remain at the core of our efforts. The Democratic Republic of Congo, and I think the introduction already foreshadowed it, has always been at the center of a lot of discussions, a lot of interests, and rightly so, because we have so much to offer. But at the same time, this should never come at the cost of Congolese lives and never at the cost of principles that we hold all, not just the DRC, but all countries of the world, as the main tenets of international peaceful cohabitation. So territorial integrity, sovereignty remain at the core of our peace and security concerns, as well as the dignity of human lives. This brings us, of course, to the current situation in Eastern DRC, one characterized by the massive displacement of civilians, but more importantly, by the aggression that is carried out by the Rwandan Defense Forces with the support of the M23, an aggression that follows very clearly economic interests. When we look at the areas that are being controlled by the M23, there is a clear juxtaposition between the territorial conquest of the M23 and the riches that you find in these respective parts of North Kivu province. So peace and security remain at the core of our efforts, also to preserve the integrity of our country. Of course, critical minerals and the global energy transition is a bit of a buzzword that we hear or that we have been hearing in the past years. And this is one of the key areas where the DRC is at the heart of solutions. What we want to do here is to make sure that we are truly at the heart of solutions. That means re-examining value chains and making sure that we occupy much more space in those value chains. That means that when we have investors, when we engage in partnerships, bilateral, multilateral, public-private partnerships, it is about making sure that we no longer occupy the tiny space of being the place where natural resources are being extracted and taken away from, to being a broader space on that value chain where we add value to the minerals before they leave, where we add value to our human capital, where we add value also to our communities. And so it is a shift to make sure that the DRC is not just the starting point, but also occupies a space in these global discussions on global energy transition. The global energy transition cannot happen without the DRC. And so we will be part of that conversation throughout, not just the beginning, not just the middle, also the end. When it comes to other aspects, such as environmental issues, again, these are things that we all know. The Congo Basin Forest that is basically the second lung of the world, means that we occupy also a key role and a key position when it comes to global climate change and how we want to tackle these challenges. It means that the DRC also has to be more assertive when we engage in conversations with different stakeholders. We have the COP coming up in a few days or in a few weeks in Baku. And this is about the DRC also stepping its game up and saying we are contributing to reducing global emissions because of our natural endowment. What does that mean in a context where you have industrialized nations that are polluting much more? How do we make sure that we have an equal footing? That does not mean that for the sake of the totally legitimate worry of making sure that we manage climate change in a more sustainable way, we do not sell ourselves short, and most importantly, we do not sell the history or the potential and the aspirations of our populations short. Finally, no, it's not finally, I'm sorry. Regional economic integration. I think I'll be quite succinct on this, but I think it's very important also that the DRC, with 9 borders, does not perceive itself only in a relationship with the global north or with other poles, if you want, of the global economy, but also as a key motor in regional economic integration. And I think there are some very interesting and innovative projects on course, such as the Lobito Corridor, but also the Tazama pipeline, which show to what extent the potential of countries coming together on the African continent can also boost and further local development and contribute to a greater democratization also, and ripple effect that has positive impacts on civilian lives and on lives that otherwise might be marginalized, especially if they are not in traditional urban hubs. The last point, and this is one very dear to me, so last but really not least, soft power. And I think this is something that we have taken for granted for a very long time in the DRC, but that kind of comes with the territory. It's the swagger, it's the music, it's the way we dress, it's the fact that we are the biggest, not one of the biggest, but we are the biggest French-speaking country on the planet. So it's about us also valuing the people. And everything else that I said, when it comes to natural resources, when it comes to forests, when it comes to minerals, all lose their value if we do not invest in the human capital, if we do not invest in those that bring that swagger, in those that speak that French. And so one key aspect also of our foreign policy is to make sure that we engage in greater interaction between people, that we open up the DRC and its touristic potential to the world, and that we also, through that, build stronger and more resilient bridges to different partners and to different countries. So I think I hope I was not too long, and I think I've given you a rough overview. I really look forward to what was announced as a robust conversation. I guess I will find out what that means. And I look forward to double-clicking on some of the points that I mentioned, but also hearing your respective ideas, opinions. And again, thank you so much for your interest, and I look forward to the conversation.
Okay, so we have plenty of time, just under 45 minutes for a conversation, robust or not. So please go ahead and we'll go straight in. So gentlemen here, there's a microphone or not, or do our audience need to just speak very loudly? So front row here at the front, the gentleman there. Yeah. No, there's a microphone coming. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. My name is Nick Haley, Executive Director of International Alert. We're a civil society organisation. Our largest team is in the east of DRC working with civil society on peace and security. If I may, could you say something about what I consider the very important role of civil society in the peace negotiations and processes that are underway at present, and how we can bring civil society more clearly into those processes? And I wonder, if I may, if you might also say a word about your government's policy with respect to MONUSCO's withdrawal, how that now feels now the new government is settled in terms of the two remaining provinces. Thank you.
Okay. Let's see some other hands. I want to spread around the room, so the gentleman over there. Everybody, I think, will get a chance to ask a question.
Your Excellency, my name is Junior Badila. I'm a broadcaster at AUK Radio. We're based in the UK. We're based in Kinshasa as well. Quite interesting, you mentioned the relationship between Congo is one of the biggest French-speaking countries in the world. Currently, there is a debate in terms of DRC relationship with France and Francophonie, l'Organisation internationale de la Francophonie. People are asking if Congo is going to pull out from OIF, Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie, because according to some of the views, the debate, that Francophonie has not achieved a lot in terms of peace and security in Congo. So what's your view on that? My last question is, because of the current conflict in Middle East, a lot of Africans are stranded in Lebanon, mostly in Beirut. And we've seen in the news Senegalese and Ivorian managed to pull out their citizens from Beirut. Few Congolese are stranded as well in Beirut. We've received a call from Congolese citizens who are in Beirut today. He even sent a message to the president, I think to the cabinet of the president, asking for help. So what's your position on that? Thank you. Okay,
I'm going to take one from online, and then that's it for the first round. Letitia Gentil has asked, please, Excellency, unpack and expand on your point of re-examining value chains. What is the place to ensure that the Democratic Republic of Congo is adding value to critical minerals and not only being an exporter of minerals? That's one of the criticisms of the Libito project, for example, if I remember right. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much. I think I will just start with the first question. So when it comes to civil society organizations in the peace process, I think one added value that we have, especially when we look at the regional scope of the ongoing peace process, is that the DRC can pride itself on having a very dynamic and open society, where civil society actually weighs in very heavily on the peace process and is very vocal about it. This is something that we welcome. This is something that I welcome, where I consult and also maybe not in such an obvious manner, but make sure that I am always in touch also with what is being said by certain civil society organizations, and I think it's extremely important. I think the ongoing Luanda process has been a very limited process in terms of participation, because also of, I believe, the concern of the facilitator to make sure that we have all the key stakeholders at the table deciding on these key issues. But at the same time, there is growing recognition that more voices need to be heard. On September 8th, I was in New York for the Security Council meeting on the Great Lakes region, and we welcomed the fact that many Security Council members, permanent and non-permanent members, actually emphasize the need to amplify the voices of women, of civil society, to make sure that the peace process is in tune with the realities on the ground, is in tune with what it is supposed to find solutions for. And therefore, we were extremely happy to see that a few weeks afterwards, the Angolan president hosted a group of women leaders, political actors, former heads of states, former women African heads of states from Liberia, Central African Republic, Ethiopia, but a lot of women leaders also from the Great Lakes region to engage in a conversation precisely about the peace process. And I think this was a watershed moment, if you want, through which women's voices were heard, and I think heard in such a way that the facilitation is, I believe, working on seeing how beyond a parallel track of conversations that has been maintained by different parties to various extents, is maybe further amplified and integrated to a certain extent. I don't want to be so bold to speculate about what shape that will take, but I think it was a very important signal to have this conversation happening at the level of the facilitator himself. And I also know that besides that meeting, there have been a lot of engagements with civil society organizations. On the point of MONUSCO, I think this is an issue that triggers a lot of interest, rightly so. MONUSCO is one of the oldest peacekeeping missions, if not currently the oldest peacekeeping mission on the African continent. And a few years ago, a roadmap for its withdrawal was drawn up, a roadmap that is broken down in 3 main elements, and it was a withdrawal that was sequenced in terms of provinces, starting with South Kivu province and then going onwards to North Kivu and Ituri. I think we very successfully had a handover from MONUSCO to the Congolese authorities on 30th of June, when MONUSCO left South Kivu definitively. We have made sustained efforts, and we're continuing our efforts to make sure that the gains that were made through MONUSCO's presence are consolidated. And this is our focus in South Kivu, but also making sure that we draw the lessons from that withdrawal from MONUSCO and make sure that we apply them in a strategic manner and informed manner when we look at North Kivu and Ituri. The challenge that we face now with the sequence is obviously that the situation in North Kivu makes it extremely difficult to envisage a withdrawal of MONUSCO. MONUSCO is there with a Security Council mandate, of course, that is grounded in the concern that international peace and security are threatened, and it is a reality with the presence of over 4,000 Rwandan troops. It is undeniable. And so there is a need for a continued MONUSCO presence. There is also a need for a continued MONUSCO presence because MONUSCO has been mandated by the Security Council to provide logistical support to the SADC peacekeeping force that has come in support, the SAMI DRC. And so what we are working on and what we are looking at when we're thinking about the new MONUSCO mandate is to see how do we have an approach that does not lose the momentum of the withdrawal from South Kivu, but does not expose our population and our national territory, if you want, to an absence or to a premature absence and withdrawal of MONUSCO, which could have dramatic consequences. And I think this is the fine-tuning that needs to be done. The momentum has to remain, and the commitment of the Congolese government to see a withdrawal of MONUSCO happen is there, unchanged, but there is also a commitment to make sure that this is a withdrawal that is sequential, that is responsible, and that is sustainable. One point that the President emphasizes always when it comes to MONUSCO is to make sure that MONUSCO leaves in a dignified manner. As I said, it's one of the longest peacekeeping missions in the African continent, and it has been also a laboratory. I've worked for MONUSCO for a while, a laboratory that has transformed peacekeeping as we've seen it and known it elsewhere on the African continent. There have been innovations that came from MONUSCO, and that did not necessarily come from expatriates in MONUSCO, but actually from very smart Congolese people. So this is our heritage also, and this is why it's important to make sure that we have an exit of MONUSCO that is responsible, but that also celebrates the milestones and the contribution of the DRC through MONUSCO to international peace and security and its architecture. On the second question regarding the OEF, indeed, I think there is a very lively debate about our relationship with France, but also our relationship with the OEF, so the Organisation Internationale de la Francophonie. And I think what is important here is that as long as we are at the table, we have to shape the conversation. I do not want to foreshadow potential decisions on whether we stay within the OEF or not. But our weight, our importance as the largest Francophone country in the world is undeniable. And I think this is an asset that we need to continue using in a strategic manner, be it by shaping conversations when we're part of the discussion and when we are at the table, or, I think Nina Simone said it, when love is no longer served or something like that, leave the table. I'm not sure we're there yet, but I think it is important to be cognizant of the weight that we carry and to use that to our advantage. And this is how we approach the situation or our relationship with OEF. And it means that we examine all the options to make sure that our weight, our contribution, our importance is duly recognized. The situation in the Middle East, and more specifically in Lebanon, I think one of the big challenges that we have in Lebanon is the fact that the DRC doesn't have an embassy. And so we have been facing considerable logistical challenges to facilitate the evacuation of Congolese citizens, but also of their Lebanese dependents. And this is something that we have been working on with our embassy in Egypt, with strong support also from our Egyptian counterparts. And it's work in progress, challenging logistics, extremely challenging because of the very volatile and unpredictable nature of the situation on the ground. But it is a priority for us, and it is something that the government is working on steadfastly to make sure that we manage to extract our people as soon as possible. We have a similar situation also with some students that have been affected by the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, and these are priorities and concerns that we have and need, of course, to take seriously in order to show up for our citizens wherever they are. The last question on adding value to value chains. Mm-hmm. Right? I think this is, this is a paradigm shift, if you want, that the government wants to embrace and make sure that it is embedded in all our relationships. So if you look at the mining industry in the DRC under previous administrations, as I said, extremely limited and very much limited to the extraction bit of the process. And so one priority for us when we engage with new partners, with new investors, wherever they come from, and I know there's a lot of scrutiny about where they come from, but wherever they come from, it is to make sure that our interests are safeguarded. And that includes making sure that we do not remain in this pattern of just being the repository of natural resources that can be extracted in an absence of transparency, in an absence of accountability, and especially in an absence of, positive impact for the communities that surround those mining sites. And so when it comes to, for example, the recent FOCAC, participation of the DRC. This is something where the president has been very transparent about with all our partners. Yes, you can extract natural resources, but invest in human capital, invest in transformation, make sure that, we break out of this cycle and out of this pattern. It is an adaptation, it is an adjustment. It also means that it is greater responsibility unto the Congolese government to make sure that we create also the environment for those ambitions to come to fruition. But it is a valid ambition, and it is one that will pay out for our population, and on the long run, make sure that we are part of the conversation, as I said.
Great. So let's go ahead. Let's go here. Second row. That gentleman there.
Thank you very much, Alex. Ma'am, Sean McCormick, a longtime friend of Chatham House and of your country as well. Matter of fact, it was this month, 35 years ago, that I met your president's father for the first time. So it's a pleasure to see you here. My question relates to the last topic, and in the spirit of Alex mentioned having a robust conversation. Maybe we can go down that path a little bit. Global cobalt prices hit an 8-year low this month. Mm-hmm. On news that a Chinese company operating in your country, CMOC, has increased its production from two of its mines, the two largest in your country, by 127% in the last 12 months, driving down the prices, driving down the value to your country, and they're exporting only cobalt hydroxide, not even a finished metal product. It's all gone to a single source supply chain through to CATL, the Chinese battery manufacturer. So the value to you continues to decline through your economy and so forth. With 70% of the world's supply of this very critical mineral, and a virtual Chinese monopoly on its production in your country, I just want to know if you're interested in diversifying, the nature of the companies that are involved in the extraction and the development of your economy? Or is there a decision to just allow DRC to be a chasse gardée of the Chinese in the mining sector now? Thank you.
Chasse gardée.
Okay. Lady there, please. There's a microphone coming to you. Please be patient. It's just there. Go ahead.
Hello,
Introduce
everybody.
yourself.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your time, and Dr. Vines for your time as well. I guess my first question, just to introduce myself.
One question.
Okay. I'm Soha Shambazi, analyst for Benchmark Mineral Intelligence, focusing more on cobalt as well. My question is on the environmental and social side of mining impact. How do you make sure that the environment and society are safe and companies are they are adhering to the environmental rules and social rules in the DRC, knowing that our research shows that it's not a problem of regulation as much as it is a problem of implementation of that regulation? How do you envision to make the implementation more stringent? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take one from the internet, which is that Maria is asking that in August, President Tshisekedi instructed Cabinet to begin discussions with the IMF on a new extended credit facility arrangement. This follows the conclusion of the 6th and last review of the latest ECF, which was, I think, from Maria saying that it was worth 1.57 billion. So the question is, what's the progress in the discussions for a new ECF with the DRC? I think that's plenty for you to answer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think I will start with the last question, precisely because we have a strong delegation currently in Washington, D.C., engaging in the continuity precisely of these conversations with the IMF and with the World Bank. I haven't had the opportunity to speak with my colleagues, but from what I've gathered from afar, I think we have very fruitful conversations, and the DRC has been making sustained efforts to comply with IMF expectations, and I think the next weeks will give us a bit more meat and a bit more substance to double click on what has been the outcome of these conversations. But we're very optimistic, and we are very also positive about a sustained, improved relationship and interaction with the IMF and with the World Bank, and contributing to, making sure that our macroeconomic framework responds to the requirements and also meets the expectations. In terms of the first question that we had on cobalt prices and diversification, I think it's a legitimate question, but I want to challenge us to take a step back. And I think when we do look at the landscape of mining in the DRC, it is true that it seems, or it may seem to some, dominated by a certain group or a certain regional, type of entities. And it might be understood as a preference, but I think it's also important to emphasize the fact that the DRC has always been open for business, for everyone. We do not look at partnership, and we do not look at investments through a lens of exclusivity, but rather a lens of complementarity. I think what is important is to understand that different investors have different thresholds, have a different appetite for risk, and are therefore sometimes more persistent, more determined, and therefore more present in certain contexts that might be challenging for some. And at the same time, as I said, there is no such thing as a chasse gardée, be it for natural resources, be it for, our rivers, be it for Inga, be it whatever it is. The DRC has always attracted and garnered a lot of attention from everyone, but it has always belonged to just the Congolese. That will never change. So there is no chasse gardée. I think what we need to do is to make sure, first of all, that we convey maybe in a more persuasive manner that the DRC is open for business in not an exclusive but a complementary manner. And I think this is where we end up all of us being the winners, because every stakeholder, every investor would bring something to the table that the other doesn't. And so complementarity is a critical aspect for us. If we are looking at value chains that are longer and more present in the DRC, complementarity is the key. It's making sure that we bring stakeholders on board that all occupy different parts of this value chain and bring those value chains to the DRC. So it's about us exploring also what are these thresholds, what are these obstacles, why do some have more hesitations than others, and making sure that we respond to that in a way that doesn't have an impact on the accessibility of market or favors one side more than the other, but that ensures that we all end up being in the DRC with the interest of working together and benefiting the Congolese people, as well as the other interests that different stakeholders bring to the table. But the logic of exclusivity is not one that drives or characterizes the way we want business to come to the DRC, the way we want investment to come to the DRC. And therefore, it's a shared responsibility on the other hand. Because at the same time, while some countries may feel frustrated that others have a step ahead, well, others dare more. And in such a context of competition, you know, it's also part of the reality. But it doesn't mean that the DRC doesn't have its role to play in making sure that we even out the playing ground and we make sure that everyone is equally motivated and has equal access and opportunities to bring to the table what they have to offer. I think we had another question on natural resources, cobalt, and environmental standards. And I think you're right on. I think you know, it's very often the challenge not of having the perfect legislation, not of having the perfect framework. And again, this is where I think we distinguish ourselves from a lot of other countries, where we say we open up that space to have frank conversations, to have uncomfortable conversations, to have international NGOs sometimes being very outspoken about what is not working in the DRC. But I think it is important because this is what helps us fine-tune and this is what helps us move forward. So the challenge is not always about the frameworks, because these are frameworks that very often have been elaborated in a collaborative manner by associating expertise from a lot of spaces. But it is a challenge in making sure that these standards are upheld, that they are enforced. And this is where you have a lot of layers, if you want, that come on top of each other, and where you have an ambitious reform agenda that, you know, ends up being at the core of the issue. How do we make sure that the rule of law is applied everywhere, including in the mining sector? And so this goes hand in hand with reforming a lot of our institutions, reforming a lot of our services, be it the police, be it environmental services, and making sure that we bridge that gap in terms of capacity, we bridge that gap in terms of resources, we bridge that gap in terms of presence, to make sure that we are present, we are equipped, and we are knowledgeable of what we have to uphold in terms of standards. And this is, of course, a big challenge in any context, because even these considerations of environmental standards, but also just in general ESG, are relatively new, not just to the DRC, but to a lot of other spaces. And so it's making sure that we respond to these expectations, but at the same time that we remain cognizant of the immense work that still needs to be done in the DRC when it comes to strengthening the state. And this is where contextualizing this in the larger scope of our country's history is important, because it is a history that has been characterized by very targeted dismantling of the state apparatus. So when we have the ambition to make sure that we have a mining sector that takes into account environmental standards, social standards, human rights standards, we also have to have the dose of realism that says we still have a long way to go in general, and in this area in particular. Does that mean that we will not be ambitious? It doesn't. And I think this is the only way forward. I think it would be short-sighted to raise the bar and not be cognizant of where we're coming from and what we need to do in order to meet those standards and expectations, which are all legitimate. Otherwise, we wouldn't have them as part of our legal framework.
Okay. More and more hands go up as
more and more hands.
This gets really
less and less time. I'm just putting that out there.
So I don't want anyone to say that I'm politically imbalanced. So I'm going to go to the far left because they haven't had the opportunity. My far left. So, my goodness.
I'm glad I don't.
The gentleman right at the end with the long hand. You, sir. Your hand is long. Yeah. Yeah, if you just hand over your laptop to the gentleman there. Please go ahead, otherwise I'll ask someone else to do the question. Go ahead. Do introduce
Your
yourself.
Excellency, yes, thank you so much. My name is Tangai Marega. I'm a professional mental health nurse working here in the United Kingdom. How I became to be a nurse in the United Kingdom, it was the geopolitical issues that took place way back, I think from the 90s, 1996 to 1997, where the UK and the government of Zimbabwe were your strategic partners in terms of securing peace. So we have always been long-time established friends, and we still have that aspiration and hope that we see the DRC back to its rightful place. So my question, I think I would, impress you with is, first of all, commenting on the recent latest progress that happened in Luanda for ongoing discussions and conclusions. But I'm just trying to find out, given the tenuous history of conflict and crisis the DRC has actually, experienced, the communities, what are the sort of kind of factors that you have factored in as far as humanitarian interventions are concerned? Because from my kind of subject specialty, I think the communities in the DRC themselves deserve healing. And I think not only the DRC, but I think the regional as a whole deserve healing. What sort of programs, humanitarian interventions you have probably or considering in as far as actually providing and attending to the mental health impact of the crisis, economic decline, and also can we foresee a potential possibility of a truth and reconciliation to open up and uncover the wounds? And then finally and last, the public diplomacy approach in terms of cultural context. The DRC is an illustrious member of the cultural environment. We remember the Yondo sisters, Pepe Kale. Those are elaborate kind of sisters, and even including yourself and the ones that are present here. Are we potentially considering reviving that? Because people of my generation were so intimate and connected to that kind of cultural aspect in as far as healing process as well as recovery of the democratic of the Congo. Thank you.
Okay, I've been going through, there are like over 100 questions here now, and I can't do that justice. But there were three. So there's one from China, which in summary is asking, there was statements out of FOCAC about really deepening the partnership between DRC and China. How might that look at? How might that develop? So that was from Yong Hei. Roman Matonda is like, you mentioned the OAF, but has the DRC considered, for example, the Commonwealth? I mean, Ghana just joined OAF, and Gabon and Togo joined the Commonwealth a couple of years ago, so that's the question. And Sylvia Annan said we're building up towards another AU-EU summit. So what's the Congolese vision, DRC vision for the EU? So it's kind of clustered on foreign policy there. And let me look at the room. The far right here has not had a question. It's you, sir. Go ahead.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for your time. Just a quick question for me on the trajectory of US-DRC foreign policy and diplomatic relations, particularly in light of Joe Biden's now postponed visit to Angola, as well as JP Morgan's Jamie Dimon's recent whirlwind tour of some key markets in Africa. How is the DRC gearing itself towards perhaps investing in US relations and how does that coincide with balancing act between developing the Lobito corridor as well as you said, diversifying the DRC's capabilities in that cobalt and kind of renewable energy mining space? How do you juggle all of those elements?
And do you introduce yourself?
Sorry, I'm James from Safala Partners, a boutique advisory based in London.
Thank you. We'll do one more round, but let's get the minister.
Perfect.
We have time
so much.
for one round after that.
So I will start with the question from my brother from Zimbabwe. So I think the aspect of healing, unfortunately, is one that is very often forgotten. I think there is a very narrow perception and definition of what we understand as healing in a conflict context. I started my career working in Eastern DRC. I started my career under M23 version 1 in 2012. And I think for anyone who has had the opportunity to be in Eastern DRC, but also in other conflict areas, you can tell very quickly that healing is not about the superficial aspect. Of course, the day-to-day, the basic needs, that's always present and omnipresent. But when we talk about healing, I think it's important to bear in mind just the social trauma that conflict puts upon entire communities, the fabric that is being torn apart, and very little effort and very little consideration is put into the need to make sure that communities heal. And I'm not just talking about communities in the DRC, but precisely communities in the region. Because the reality is, very often these communities have been separated by borders, but share a lot. They share languages, they share customs, they have intermarried. So this is a reality where we, as a responsible region, have to face ourselves and ask ourselves the question, how do we move forward from 30 years of trauma, not just in the DRC, but trauma throughout the region, to heal? How do we actually seize the potential of the region if we do not bring people together, if we do not heal those wounds? And I think the aspect of truth and reconciliation, which we have had different iterations of in the region, has to also have a greater ambition for the region. We have seen iterations in Uganda. We have seen iterations of that in Rwanda, in Burundi, in the DRC. There has been, continuous traction and continuous calls for that. And I think it is legitimate to have those efforts at the national level, but it is also important for us to start talking about truth and reconciliation, but also impunity at a regional level. We cannot move forward as a region. We cannot move forward in peace, in trust with one another, in building this region, if we do not address the issue of impunity and if we do not address the issue of accountability. After 30 years of violence, cyclical violence, and some of these stakeholders being known for 30 years, still being there needs to be a serious conversation about how we put an end to a cycle of conflict by raising the issue that is certainly uncomfortable for everyone of impunity. And so it is about chain of commands. It is about linking what is happening on the ground with what has been decided in a capital and making sure that these are not perceived as individually, random people who take up arms. When we have 4,000 Rwandan defense forces on our territory, somebody took that decision. And it's not 4,000 of them who just woke up and decided to cross the border. So when we talk about accountability, it is the chain of command. And we will not be able to move forward in the region if we do not have those uncomfortable conversations. So I fully agree with you on the need for greater accountability, greater truth and reconciliation, even if it is at times a very difficult process to engage and to embark on. Reviving cultural aspects or cultural diplomacy, as I said, I'm all for it. I think it's about, again, using also culture as a bridge to bring people together and actually celebrating what already exists. So I think it's also about, to a certain extent, even low-hanging fruits, because Congolese music is just effortlessly omnipresent. I know this is a bit, I'm being a bit boastful, but it is effortlessly present. And so from our perspective as a government, from our perspective as a Ministry of Foreign Affairs, it's seeing how do we make sure that what is already happening through the, through the efforts of individuals can be amplified, can be accompanied, and can be celebrated, but also can be showcased in a manner that gives respect for the craftsmanship and for the talent that is being displayed. And this is something that we see in so many other countries. So again, it's not about that being an exceptional effort, but I think it has to be a more conscious effort on our side. China, FOCAC, and deepening ties between the DRC and China and what that may look like. I think one key takeaway is also that from the conversations in China, there was a shared interest of both parties to make sure that our partnership go beyond the scope that it has had for now. So it's looking at different sectors. It's looking at where we can have greater win-win relationships. I think when people hear and think about DRC and China relationships, everybody thinks about mines and cobalt. But on the other hand, in a few days, we will be inaugurating together with China a magnificent state-of-the-art cultural center, and cultural center that is probably one of the largest in Central Africa. And I think this foreshadows where a partnership can go beyond these traditional comfort zones, if you want. And I think there is much more than we can look forward to in the aftermath of FOCAC. The EU summit, I think, and our vision when it comes to the European Union, I think the DRC has had, especially in the recent months, a few moments of friction with the EU. I will say that as diplomatically as I can. But I think what we remain committed to is engaging in a constructive dialogue. It's making sure that our voices are heard in a much more audible manner, in a much more telling manner. I think when it comes to the EU, we want to make sure that what is presented to us as principles, what is presented to us as ideals, and these are ideals we adhere to, of course, because we're a member state of the United Nations, because we have signed on a number of international human rights conventions and international humanitarian law conventions. It's making sure that these things add up, that the narrative fits with the action that's being taken. And I think this is where we want to engage more robustly with the European Union, with the expectation that what is said translates into concrete action. One issue that has come up quite frequently with the EU is the problematic relationship that we have with Rwanda. The fact that the EU has signed on an agreement with Rwanda on natural resources that just resulted in, I think, a very collective global question mark. And so, it's about engaging very robustly in these conversations and saying, well, this is the narrative, this is the action, there seems to be a disconnect, and how do we make sure that we are on the same page? And on the specific case of the European Union and the tensions that we currently have in the region, I think this is where we hope to engage in a much more constructive, but also in a much more frank manner. We welcome the fact that the EU sanctioned some individuals in Rwanda, but we believe that it can do much more. We believe it can do much more, especially when it is providing funds to Rwanda for its peacekeeping efforts in other countries, and there is maybe a greater need for accountability, for traceability, and for making sure that support that is provided by the EU is not diverted and contributes to destabilizing the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I think these are areas where the EU is extremely well equipped in terms of regulatory arsenal to make sure that we are comforted in our very legitimate concern that aid that is provided to one country is not diverted to destabilize a neighboring country. I'm not sure if I've covered everything.
Did you mention Commonwealth?
Oh, Commonwealth,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
You are in the UK. It is a question you might
That
ask.
is true. That is true. I think this brings us back to, and I don't want to go too far in history, but I think this brings us back to, you know, this question of whether the DRC is the chasse gardée or whether the DRC belongs to anyone. And no, it never has, you know, and I think it has a lot to do with our own country's history, how it came about, how, you know, from being born out of the imagination of a monarch in Belgium. I'm just trying to be as, you know, limited as I can, but from a monarch in Belgium. But you know, this idea, you know, was translated into action not just by Belgians. So this is what inherently makes the DRC that international. When it comes to the campaign against the Congo Free State, this was a campaign led on by Scandinavians. This was a campaign led on by Americans. And so we inherently have always been at the center, at the core. We do not belong to anyone except ourselves, which gives us immense freedom and immense potential because we are spoiled rotten for choices and options. Same thing with the Commonwealth. And it means that we have opportunities and that we have to explore these opportunities in a very proactive manner and in a very assertive and confident manner. And that means staying on with the OEF, but also opening up to other options.
And that's the moment, I'm afraid, that we have to end today. Honestly, it's very rare for us to get a foreign minister that spends 45 minutes doing Q&A. So we're very privileged, and I'm sorry that I can't take more questions. There are also many more online, but I think everybody will agree that this was an hour well spent listening to this discussion. So let's thank the Foreign Minister.